Thinking Basketball Podcast. My name is Ben. Welcome back to another episode. Cody, I was going to say we're live on YouTube, but we're not live at all. We still record things. That's how podcasts work. I still haven't adjusted to this new camera situation. Some of you on YouTube were nice enough to tag my dog when she made an appearance, and now with the blurry, it's blurry. It's a disaster. I got the Coke bottles on today. We're ready to go. We are ready to go. Cody, how are you doing?
You know, I would like to think that the blurriness behind you is actually going to help my focus, because now, Ben, instead of being distracted by the decor behind you, I just get to focus directly on you, make eye contact with you, and follow along with your points as we go. So this will be a good thing in general.
There were too many things going on in the background for you. It was a little too distracting.
Yeah, I was a little too distracted. Kind of like with my background. I know you get really distracted by everything back here. It's just there's a lot going on with it. So, you know, I think if we were to make it less busy, we could both improve even better.
It's true. It has deep, sort of Midwestern, Wisconsin-y basement vibes, and I know that's the feel you were going for. You've completely slammed it. We have to start our show with our update on offensive rating in the NBA in the last month. It continues to trend upward like a NASA rocket launched out of Cape Canaveral. What did rockets get launched out of? A rocket station?
A launch pad. The only thing I know about rocket launches is from the James Bond GoldenEye video game, when you're like in the silo and the thing like opens up and you're supposed to stop it. All of my knowledge of missile launches comes from GoldenEye. I'm
sure all of the gamers that programmed that consulted heavily with NASA scientists about how that rocket should operate. Whereas we might not talk about the Houston Rockets today, but they are part of this explosion that's going on. And Cody, I don't know if you've looked it up, but I did. Over the last month, offensive rating is now league-wide 116.5. 116.5. If it makes you feel better, the Rockets are at about 111. So the Rockets are still kind of, for those of us that can't change too quickly, that can't adjust that radically to what's happening, the Rockets are still playing like it's 2016. So I thank them for having a low offensive rating in the last month. Actually, interesting enough, the Rockets do not have the lowest offensive rating in the NBA in the last month. Do you know who does?
I don't know that. Who is it?
It's the Phoenix Suns at 108.7, dragging the rest of us down. Cody, we could, if Devin Booker were healthy and the Suns were operating like a well-oiled machine, we could be up at 117, the league average, which is probably where we're headed anyway.
Ben, I hate to do this live to you right now, because we just established that we're doing this live directly to YouTube. You should refresh your page and look at that number again.
I refreshed it before. Has it changed in real time as we've been recording this live?
Ben, I don't think 116.5 captures what the offensive rating in the last month is.
What captures it?
When I refresh it, because I checked, I'm like, that's not what my number says. So I refreshed it again and checked. Ben, my people are telling me it's 117 over the last month.
Wait a second. It has changed. I refreshed it before we recorded, and this is how quick offensive rating changes in the NBA. It's 117 in the last 31 days. How is this humanly possible? Cody, are we headed for a 120 month this season? Just average? Is that where we're headed?
I legitimately don't know. I was trying to look into this. I was like, what is like a question that I don't even know how to answer is like, what is the top end offensive rating a single 5-man lineup could have? You know, because I was batting some ideas around, and I'm like, it doesn't seem like 5-man lineups really get, in a sustained sample at least, get too much above like 125. Like that seems to be where it levels out. Are we going to start pushing that ceiling more? Like where's it end, Ben? Where logically, what is the best offensive rating you can actually have? I don't know. I can't handle this number.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like a dummy because I used to think, I swear just a couple years ago, we were having arguments about if you put like Michael Jordan and Steph Curry and Nikola Jokic on the same team, like if you could just gin up the greatest offensive lineup ever, could you have like a 130 offensive rating. Well, I swear people were like 127, 125. Cody, in the last month, the Sacramento Kings have a 125 offensive rating. The whole team, that's their offensive rating in the last month. It's 124.6. They've had the best offensive rating in the league because the Kings play beautiful, beautiful basketball. And I've been thinking about this since the latest video on the Thinking Basketball YouTube channel. That was a heck of a lot of fun to do. The video idea, for those who aren't steeped in X's and O's evolution and things like this, it really just started as, hey, this is a very, very popular counter for spotting up when help. If you notice, the video is very much about punishing help when you're outside the three-point line without shooting. And a lot of these things are like basically quote unquote automatic cuts, at least in Europe. Like a lot of these old things, they're old now, they're new for us, bubble up into the NBA. And it's just this idea of, well, if defenses are going to play a certain way and slide over into driving gaps, and there's going to be a third guy coming over to help in the pick and roll all the time, offenses do you a favor by standing still. So you start to learn like, hey, this triggers a cut. And the Kings do this so well. The Kings embody this maybe better than anyone in the league. That's the reason why they were the subject of a video earlier this year where we looked at sort of combining the new trends in the league. And one of them, I snuck it back in this video, is just like, hey, you're over on the wing and someone leaves, 45 cut. They just baseline cut anytime help comes. Opposite corner drive, you put it on the floor and you get a step, 45 cut from the opposite wing. These things are all baked in, and they're so difficult to defend. And so, yeah, as teams wisen up, I'm actually just wondering, like, what's the next defensive counter in this incredible arms race that we're watching?
Well, I mean, it almost seems like you need to start getting more people that just like hang out near the paint area. Because the point is like if somebody drives, there's something, weak side where somebody's cutting in during a drive, that you're cutting towards the basket and there's multiple people going towards the basket. So I think defenses are going to need to figure out how to get closer to there while keeping their guy. I genuinely don't know. I'm not going to try and do this right now. That's the first thing I think about when I'm hearing all this.
The shooting's too good, though. The shooting's too good. So there's another common thing, and the Kings do this just as much as anyone, if not more than anyone, where you take a wing and you have him hang out under the basket area briefly. He doesn't literally stand there because there's 3 seconds, right? So he can't just park himself there. But the wing starts the play kind of on the block or near the charge circle, and he can dart out in any direction. I talked about this in the Kings video. He can get involved in a Spain pick and roll. He can set the screen. He can slip to the three-point line. He can cut to the corner. He can come off a baseline screen. And because the shooting's so good, when you make that guy Kevin Huerter, when you make that guy Steph Curry, when you make him a good shooter, Cody, it's like they've got the body in the paint, but that guy's more worried about sprinting out to the three-point line and just the interplay of like, do you stop a layup or do you stop an open three? I don't know what you do. I don't know what you do if you're a defense. It's been staggering to watch.
So it's interesting because beyond these 45 cuts that you were talking about, something else that you talked about in the video that you referenced is this like stampede that players are doing. Like instead of catching and immediately going into a drive or shooting, they like start their drive before they actually catch the ball. And I'm not going to say like who started it or where it began or wherever else, but I remember seeing it with like Herb Jones earlier in the season, where this is a guy that's not a super strong shooter, but as soon as the pass started coming, I saw him like starting to make his movement towards the basket. And it's really interesting because it made me think about, when you were on, it's the basketball podcast with Chris Oliver, I believe.
Yep.
And you were talking about like outdated drills, like maybe doing the Micah drill. Let me tell you, Ben, the amount of Micah drills that I did in my day is it's unbelievable. I could do those things all day. But the other thing to me that seems to be obsolete or being phased out is like the triple threat. Like the amount of times that I was taught to like catch, triple threat. I'm able to do all these different actions. Like, how often do you actually see a player triple threat that's not like, I don't know, DeMar DeRozan or something like that? And I'm not like picking on DeMar DeRozan, but it seems to be like the high level scorers that when they get the ball, they're going to do something. I just feel like triple threat in general is sort of phasing out because of the danger of being able to make these cuts immediately.
That's such a great point because I think what's happening is the actions are so quick. It's that 0.5 concept. You might hear coaches talk about that. Just make a decision within half a second. And so the really cool thing about this idea of stampeding or going on the catch, I'm sure there's all sorts of different terms for it around the world, is that it's not quite an automatic cut trigger. Because if you were to cut first, in theory, and I have some examples of this in the video, you would draw defensive attention. You would change a passing angle. You would move a defender with you. But you're kind of waiting, the defender commits, and then you've decided, as the offensive player receiving this pass, I'm not going to spot up and shoot. I'm going to go and attack this closeout, but I'm actually going before the ball gets to me because I've already made that decision. And to your point, the way the game is played with the movement, the spacing, the passing, the dribble handoff. I don't know if I've heard anyone say this explicitly, but dribble handoff to me, Cody, feels like the ultimate cheat code for a moving screen, right? It allows you, you're dribbling the ball, so it allows you to carve out space. And of course, you can set a moving screen doing a dribble handoff. You can get too aggressive with like turning your hips or whatever it may be. But just this idea of having freedom to dribble and create angles with the ball and kind of, Jokic, Sabonis, Şengün, all these guys do this. They spin and they twirl. And then you have the handoff. To your point, like, where's the triple threat in that action? It doesn't exist because it's too slow. It's too stagnant. And so where do you still see it? Like pinch post scorers who want to isolate in the middle of the court. Pascal Siakam, he can get it and he has a fresh dribble and he can use the jab step. He can use the rocker step to kind of move his defender off him. James Harden resetting in isolation. So it's still there a little bit, but the way the game is played in all these actions, it's such a great point. It's almost obsolete with the rest of the league.
And I think you've brought this turn up a lot, and that's the cognitive load. And that seems to be the thing that's really stressing defenses more than anything. Obviously, the physical toll of having to run around and chase these guys. But combining that physical toll with the cognitive load of being like, all right, I have to be watching this person, I have to be watching this person. I've been watching a lot of Jaren Jackson lately, and something that I notice he does is his head is on a swivel. Like he's constantly like, he's on his guy, but he's looking over here, looking over here, looking over here. And I think I sent you all a clip. I sent the Thinking Basketball Intelligentsia a clip of like Jordan Poole playing some off-ball defense. And like, he doesn't look at the ball at any point. Like he's sitting here staring at his man, and like he doesn't notice that like, hey, I'm at the nail. I should probably look and try and help on this drive. So like the ability to process everything that's going on to me is just like the main thing that makes playing defense just so impossible right now. And I think, I don't know, you can be as in shape as possible, but like that's the part of the game that's like, I don't know where we go with I don't want to say improving cognitive load, but like how do you work on the cognitive load part of playing defense in basketball and stuff like that?
Yeah. I mean, you can train it. It probably exists with like some kind of natural distribution where some people are stronger, some people are weaker, some people are outliers. But if you're not practicing these things, if you're not practicing creating awareness, and it's like driving a car, the first time you get out there, you got the blinkers and you got yields and stops and all this, it's getting those reps. So if you're in that position, Jordan Poole, and you're kind of near the nail and you should probably slide over and stop the ball. But I think on that play, he was so focused on this little possible screening action in front of him that he's just like, I think we're good. Yeah, I think that's the only way to do it. I had a PSA. I want to get to it. I want to get to it in a second. I'll tease the PSA that I want to get to because I want to talk about something else while we're on this topic. As the game evolves, as the game changes, and you've got more shooters on the court, more movement, more of these dynamic three-person actions we've talked about. Now, to me, that video that we just did is like another layer, because you're not stationary as a shooter. You're not stationary as a spot-up guy. You also, whether you're a good shooter or not, it only just makes it harder if you're a good shooter. But whether you're a good shooter or not, you can also cut every time help needs to be sent to go help with the screening and pick and roll action. How does that change development? How does that change how we both think of young players as they come into the league, how we think of NBA level players as they develop, and kind of the pipeline, the youth pipeline? You know, I don't know if you've thought about this, Cody, but I've heard people sort of discuss this idea that most of the top superstars in the world now are international, right? Like where are the incredible American players? Is that because of a different youth system? Is that different development tracks? Is that because you're Luka Doncic and you can go play professionally when you're 13 or 15 years old or whatever it is? If you're Nikola Jokic, do you get to be a point guard regardless of how big you are and what you look like and things like that? I mean, it plugs into this to me because as the style of the game changes, the skills that we prioritize also evolve with those changes.
Yeah, personally, I'm not going to wade too much in these waters because I feel like this is outside of the scope of what I consider to be like more knowledgeable on, right? So I don't want to say like, oh, it's AAU ball that's toxic, or it's, oh, American League basketball is just bad for this. I genuinely don't know, but I do think something that you said that's really interesting is the ability to play at the pro level at a younger age. Like I remember, the Redeem team, when the Redeem team, was that 2007, 2008?
2008, yeah.
2008, when the Olympic team, I think they ended up playing, was that the first time they played Ricky Rubio? And it was a whole thing. It's like, this guy's like 17 years old, and look how he's going against Chris Paul. Imagine getting reps against Chris Paul, against LeBron James when you're 17. And like you said, your metaphor about driving, because, that's one of those things where all these things are going on. And when you get to that higher level quicker, I just genuinely feel like that has to do a lot for your ability to develop in multiple of these ways. So I don't know if that's the main thing, but that's one thing that stood out to me out of everything you said.
Do you feel or do you kind of notice that more of the, I mean, if you look at the best players in the league, you look at the MVPs, Giannis and Jokic have won the last 4 MVPs, right? And then Embiid has been there many times. Luka is knocking on the door this season. And I think the domestic players that have come out of American systems, it still seems to be the prior generation, right? Like Steph Curry, Kevin Durant. We'll see where he finishes this year. But throw some other names at me, Cody. Like when you look at the very top of the league, I guess Jason Tatum is maybe the youngest of that class, because a lot of the top players, I think, are guys that came in the league like probably before 2013.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I think people might be listening and be like, "Oh, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has a chance of getting to this point. Ja Morant might develop to the point where he's an MVP level player. Zion Williamson, another guy that might develop into this kind of player." But I don't know, Ben. I genuinely don't know how to even tackle this conversation, because even like I could try and make some kind of an argument about how there seems to be a disconnect between like NBA basketball and college level basketball in the United States. And I know, being on the ground level, talking to the people, Ben, talking to the people out in the world, not a huge amount of fans of the NBA out there, right? Like a lot of people, when I talk about the fact that I watch a lot of NBA, it's like, oh, college basketball is so much better. I'm not going to comment on that. I don't watch college ball. I can't tell you about the differences in strategy in college and NBA, but I wonder if like that sort of disagreement exists elsewhere around the world. Like, is anyone like, oh, you're a EuroLeague fan? Like, psh, it's so much better in whatever sort of other systems. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of really interesting differences around the world when it comes to basketball development. Yeah,
I think that's just because you're in Big Ten country, don't you think?
Once again, I don't know. I just know my little circle that I participate in, and that's all I can speak on.
Yeah, I think that's Big Ten country. I also, I mean, I think there are some people that think there's sort of a full-blown shift between international and domestic players in terms of superstars and development. One, I think superstars are just like random mutations in X-Men, just like superpowers that come down. Some generations have 5, some generations have 2. They come in different forms, but we're kind of blessed with them whenever they come down the pike. And 2, I don't know if I completely buy into the fact that there's some disproportionate thing happening where Americans are falling behind, because America and Europe is like roughly the same size in population, right? So I think once you start opening the doors to multiple continents and you start saying, hey, we can just go, we can do camps, and all of a sudden Pascal Siakam and Joel Embiid come out of Africa. I mean, Africa is enormous. It's just an absolutely enormous continent. South America, like, it makes sense to me that you can go a while without having a superstar. If their talent pool gets expanded, like having multiple superstars from one country especially. So I don't know if I even am saying that there's like this radical shift, but it is interesting to think about on the development track with what we were saying, where, and neither of us, it's not our area of expertise, so I don't know, but it's just fascinating to think about at the youth level. And then when you get into our purview, when you actually like start evaluating young players, what does it mean when a second round draft pick looks really good all of a sudden at like point center, and he was drafted behind the center that the team wanted to develop in the first place? Like how do we judge these things as we judge developing talent? And similarly, we've got this class of sophomore players this year where now Cade Cunningham is shelved for the season. Evan Mobley has been criticized a ton for, not being Tim Duncan. And Scotty Barnes is sort of, I feel like if there was a reality show about Scotty Barnes in his second year, it would be called like The Adventures of Scotty Barnes, or maybe The Adventures of Body Scarns. But like, that situation and that team is a bit chaotic. It's a bit up and down, but this is only their second year. These guys are so young. They're 20, 21 years old. And I remember the same things were said about Jason Tatum in his second year, where it's like, oh, he's going to regress as a shooter, and he's got bad shot selection, and, he's not going to improve in this area. And it's like, let the guy grow into his body. Let Jaren Jackson grow into his body, and then at least we can talk.
Let me get to that in just a second. But first, I want to call to action to all of the people out there who are just sitting there like, you know what? I just need inspiration for my next book, and then it's going to be made. Here's your book. I need a global comparison of how basketball is developed everywhere, right? And you can tie in information about the AAU, EuroLeague, the NBA, all of this stuff, and show kind of like all of the elements that make players who they are in their different contexts. I think that would be a really fascinating read, because like I said, this is so outside my purview. I don't watch college ball. I don't watch international ball. I basically am in my little silo of the NBA, and I would love to see the perspectives of somebody that's able to tie this all together, into one of those classic like 700-page National Book Award type winning thing. That would be the best read of the decade, honestly, in my very humble opinion, Ben.
There was a book, and I don't even know if it holds up to actual scrutiny, but there was a book that was called How Soccer Explains the World. Have you heard of this book?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay, it was an older book, and it kind of looks at the differences between like soccer culture, soccer fandom, soccer infrastructure, soccer economics, soccer politics, and then tries to like map it onto the people of different regions of the world, because soccer is such a global game. And I've said this before, soccer is the game you play with your feet. Basketball is the game you play with your hands, and it's kind of natural that those become the two most popular sports on the planet if they're not already there. So I think something like that would be really interesting.
I'm gonna have to check that out. I like the idea of like skeleton key philosophies somehow unlocking everything globally. That's very sexy to me.
Yeah, Ben, I said, I don't know if it's valid, but it's fun.
It's interesting. It at least like shows connections between different topics that aren't necessarily connected. I like that kind of thinking. I have a question for you, Ben. You bring up, Mobley and Barnes and all these guys and everyone that's like, oh, they're struggling. We should sound the alarm and stuff like this. I don't feel that, right? I don't necessarily feel to sound the alarm bells, but for you, as somebody that like watches these progressions, you've made videos on Jason Tatum in his second season. You made videos on, people's movement patterns and how they're playing in their rookie seasons, whatnot. When do you sound the alarm bells? At what point in somebody's development are you like, this person might actually be regressing, or maybe this person isn't actually as good as I thought he was? What are sort of the key things you look for to find that happening?
That's a cool question, because one concept that's always in the back of my head is the aging curve. So we have a good amount of evidence that for whatever reasons, physical development, maturity, who knows, when you're 18, that's radically different than when you're 21. And that also is potentially radically different than when you're 25. But for most players, when you're 25 to 28, that's not radically different. 28 to 30 is not radically different. And I've talked about this before. Usually, if you're a really skilled player, as you go deeper in the aging curve, you replace athletic, like raw, explosive athletic advantages with kind of tricks of the trade advantages. You get a little smarter about your reads. You get a little crisper with your passing. You learn how to trick the officials a little bit or use up fakes or whatever. The hard part today, Cody, I think, is shooting development, because we had a Twitter Spaces that I think is still available for the NBA. We do a monthly Twitter Spaces collaboration with the NBA, and we had Pelicans assistant coach Fred Vinson, who's sort of the shooting doctor, great shooting coach there. He was a really good shooter when he played in the 90s at Georgia Tech, and he probably most famously has helped Lonzo Ball improve his outside shooting when he arrived there, and Brandon Ingram. And that 1 year jump from Brandon Ingram, it's got to be one of the biggest jumps in single season jumps in NBA history. And he had a nugget. Again, I encourage you to check that out if you're interested. But he had a nugget in there when we were talking about this, where he said Brandon just learned things faster than almost anybody he's ever worked. Like, he would give him a concept, and then the next day he would like have it down, and he'd be like, got it, what's the next concept? And just the interaction of that learning capacity with finding a coach who can teach you things, I think that's always going to make the shooting part kind of tricky, because usually guys get better as they're 23, 24, 25, but it's rare to see a 30-year-old jump in I'm not even sure that's even really happened. But now I'm just wondering, like, could you... Like Bruce Brown for the Nuggets, okay? And this is critical for the playoffs this season, I think. Bruce Brown has clearly worked on his outside shot, and it's kind of, he reminds me of Bruce Bowen in the sense that it's mostly on the wings below the break, the corners and up to the break. That's where he likes to shoot a lot of threes. And he's gone from someone who was never a very good three-point shooter. I think in college he was like 31% from the college line. Someone can double check that. It wasn't great, and he's maybe like a high 60s, low 70s% free throw shooter. And every year he's been in the NBA, he's added a little bit more. And now you watch the Nuggets, and not only is he taking like 3 or 4 threes a game and making them at 40%, and his wide open numbers the last year are really strong, they're above average, but he shoots it with confidence. Like, he is comfortable with that stroke, with that form. And so I think that's the single hardest part today to figure out. Like, is Evan Mobley going to be able to be a solid shooter, or is he just capped and whatever growth limits his shooting?
I think what's interesting, first of all, you say the development of a player's shooting around like 30. The first player I actually think about that might even be closest to this is Kevin Durant. Like, I think we talked about this last time, but I feel like as he got closer to 30, his jump shot did get better. And we talked about this last episode, but it seems shocking because he's always been such a good shooter, but it seems like it's even more dialed in. But I think what's really interesting, especially when you're looking at like year-to-year sample sizes, is trying to figure out exactly how good of a shooter a player is. And I'm glad that you brought up Tim Duncan, because I think he's a great example of this. Because if you go into Basketball Reference and you check out Tim Duncan's year-to-year free throw percentage, I don't have it pulled up, Ben, but I remember it's all like 1 year he shoots like 80%, the other it's like 67, and it's like the second year is the best, and then year 17 is better. And Giannis is kind of the same way. Like, he had a run of like 70+% from the free throw line, and the last couple of years he's been in the 60%. So, like, sure, we can see, like, we can pull up a player's stats and look at how well they've been shooting throughout the season, but like, does that actually tell us how good of a shooter they are? And I think that in itself is an interesting question. Is like, you don't have a handy little 2K rating for each NBA player. I can't just pull it up and be like, oh, Durant's 3-point rating is 96. Like, that doesn't exist. So it's tough to, like, it's interesting to think about looking at the data that we have available and actually trying to determine, are you better now? Are you improving in the margins? I don't know. It's just tough to figure out exactly how good a player is at something.
I think the data on the shooting stuff is pretty reliable. I mean, we talked about it when we did the best shooters of all time episode. Duncan's weird because he goes up and down. So if you look at the multi-season stuff, there really isn't any change, but he has this one random season in like 2002 where he shoots 80% from the line, and there's no other year between 1998 and 2011 where he's above 73% save for the 2000 season. So I think you can get an idea of it. I think it's safe to say Durant is a better shooter now than he was, 10 years ago. He kind of had this improvement. So that stuff does happen. But not to get totally sidetracked on the shooting component, because that's an interesting one in today's game. But you also asked me, like, things I'm looking at that concern me for the younger players. I like experimentation. We've mentioned this before. I don't like building bad habits, so I get a little concerned. So Barnes is an interesting one right now because if his shot doesn't come around and he just really seems to fall in love with or get more comfortable kind of as a roaming rogue entity on offense and defense, let's put it that way. There's a lot of like chaos and randomness. Then I think if we got to the third year and I didn't see any change, maybe, and the other thing is coaching changes, teammate changes, getting traded, all of those things put you in a new situation. If you go to that new situation and I see the exact same thing, then I sort of start to officially become concerned because I'm like, well, it's not really context. There isn't any growth, and it's not because of the context. It's just because maybe this is who you are or where you are as a player. Whereas, let's go back to the aging curve thing. If you're not really good by like 22 or 23, then I'm ready to mostly sell you as like a high-end upper echelon prospect, just because most players who have come along by 23 are really good. And I don't know what the threshold is. I can give you a stat and say, look at our box plus minus. I could say he needs to be near an all-star or something. We could put a threshold on it. But just to answer your question, like conceptually, if you want to be a great player in the NBA and you're not already good when you're young, that's when I'm already like a little bit concerned about your overall ceiling. Jaren Jackson's a perfect example. Like if Jaren Jackson came out this year and it was just kind of like more of the same, but even more problems and kind of like, oh, maybe he regressed a little from last year and he's fouling more and it's a disaster and he's shooting 22% from downtown, I'd be like, yeah, Jaren Jackson's probably never going to be like an upper echelon player. But instead, this is his 5th year. He's 23 years old because he came into the league when he was so young, and he's improved again. And he's just physically, if you watch him from like 2 years ago to today, he just moves so. He's a beast. He's an absolute beast out there. That nickname of the Block Panther is really an interesting nickname because it evokes this like the way the guy lurks in the shadows. Cody, he just terrorizes people in the lane. And he's such a physical specimen. So that would be an example of someone who I'm following and I think is tracking in a good direction. But if he had come out and had a bunch of other things happen in year 5 at 23 in the other direction, then I'd be like, he's just never going to make it.
So with respect to guys like Scotty Barnes, Evan Mobley, Cade Cunningham, and obviously Cade's a different story because he's out for the season at this point. But because they came in as good as they were, do you give them a little bit more leeway then? You're like, all right, this development track might be a little bit slower because you came in at just a higher floor at the beginning of your journey.
Yeah, I mean, Mobley's floor as a defender is absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Like when you come in as a rookie and you're already a really good NBA defender, that's very rare, right? Because even when you're a good defensive prospect, whether you're Jaren Jackson or Anthony Davis or whatever, you still kind of need to learn things about the game. You need to get in the condition of an 82-game season, the physicality when you're a paint presence to kind of be sturdy with your body and be strong and not be pushed around. Those things take time. And Mobley right out of the gate was a really positive defender. So that gives him an incredibly high floor, and it does change things a little bit for me. Who else did you ask about? I'm already forgetting.
I think the big three that I talk about, and it's not fair to bring up Cade Cunningham, but Cade Cunningham, wow, that was a tough name. Cade Cunningham, Evan Mobley, and Scotty Barnes.
Yeah, you were having a Nick Claxton moment. Yeah, I mean, I think this applies to anybody, not just these three guys. So, boy, we could talk about this all day. I think. Let's do the PSA. Should we do the PSA?
Let's do a PSA.
Here's my PSA. Cody, I'm going to get up on my little soapbox for 30 seconds. I'm going to jump off. If you just indulge me, if you will. The minutes per game thing where people are like, I'm going to choose Bob Lanier over Kareem Abdul-Jabbar because he's played 200 more minutes per game. One, it doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't seem to make sense. Like some guys, they roll an ankle, they miss 2 games, their team's good, they play 5, they sit out the fourth quarter. It just doesn't seem to be a big deal. 2, there's no historical precedent for this. This is not how All-Stars used to be voted. I mean, especially with the fans, if you were injured all year, the fans would vote you in. They want to see you. So you missed the first half of the year recovering from a broken leg. You play 5 games. The fans want to see you in the All-Star game. 3, and this one's the most important. Sorry, I'm over my allotted 30 seconds, but I saved the best for last. We used to vote for the All-Star game and announce it and have the coaches and everyone, whoever picks the reserves. That used to be done right before All-Star weekend. So it was based on the number of games you played moving into the All-Star break. So if you were going to play 55 games before the All-Star break, it was based on 53 or 54 games, the voting. Now, the deadline for the voting, did it just pass? I think it just passed. I don't know when you're listening to this at home, but it basically just ended. And so all the voting has to be in, and the All-Star game is 1 month away. It's 1 month away. So I don't know if the league wants that. I don't know if the league's like, we would love to choose our All-Stars based on the smallest sample possible. It's no more than 41 games of the season for us to select our All-Stars. But that is probably the part that is the craziest to me, because I remember doing the Sub All-Star team. We'll do our Sub All-Star podcast in a couple weeks where we'll basically just rattle off the guys who are obviously at an All-Star level. When I first did it, Chris Paul was in Houston, and it was his second year in Houston, and he was recovering from some Chris Paul injury. You guys know what I mean when I say it, Chris Paul, like a hamstring or like a foot, or he had one of these, and people were like, Chris Paul's washed up. Is he good anymore? And I just remember doing that podcast, and I was like, this is weird. Chris Paul is clearly an All-Star level player. He's better than all these players you're talking about. And it's going to get really weird in a few years. I didn't think he'd have this level of longevity, but it's like he goes to Oklahoma City, and it's like, oh yeah, Chris Paul is obviously better than all those players. So what ends up happening is you get these really weird historical blips where, like, literally at some point you're almost like, why didn't Steph Curry make the All-NBA or All-Star team in this year where he averaged, like, his stats look exactly the same. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did not make the All-Star team in the heart of his prime because because of games played. So it has happened, right? It's not like this is a thing that hasn't happened, but it just never sits right with me. It's always a weird thing. That's my PSA.
Okay. I've grappled with the minutes played thing a lot, because I think about it a lot when it comes to All-NBA, MVP type stuff, and I genuinely don't know how to handle it. So I'm gonna ask you something here. I'm gonna ask you maybe a couple of questions. I don't know how many questions I have, but I have questions about it.
You have a litany of complaints.
I don't know if complaints is the right word. I have questions, Ben. Do you not think that there should be, because I mean, the nature of the All-Star games, it happens at this point in the season. It's like 65% of the way through the season, something like that.
No, it happens in February. It doesn't happen now.
But
it happens in a month.
Let's pretend that's out of the way, right? Like, regardless, the All-Star game happens 50 to 60%. That's how much of the season that we see. Do you not think that there should be some kind of minutes played threshold when it comes to this? Because I know you're not going to look at it and be like, who's a player that hasn't played this season, right? Who's a good player that hasn't played? I know there's somebody off the top of my head.
Lonzo Ball? Has he not played?
Sure, let's say Lonzo Ball for the sake of argument. You're like, Lonzo's clearly an all-star player usually. He should be voted in the all-star game. Obviously, you wouldn't say that because he hasn't played a minute. So clearly there's a low end where you're like, all right, we can't accept these players. And so where is the threshold? That's our word of the day because you said that earlier. Where's the threshold of when you should be voting for a player to be an all-star, essentially?
Well, even with that one, I think historically for me, the question has always been, do you put that player in the game because he's in the heart of his prime and everyone feels like he's an all-star, and then he gets replaced out, basically? Because that happened a lot. You have these stars that are established stars, and they're selected into the all-star game, and they can't play because of injury. They've missed a month, and they're still going to miss the all-star game, but they're still selected, and then that opens up an extra spot for a current player. And this just creates this historical precedent of like, well, we selected the guy we felt was better. Everyone agreed he was better. And then we also got to select this other guy. And it's very clear on the ballot, he's a replacement. He's an injury replacement replacing this player. That to me communicates very clearly kind of how people are feeling about the game. About the best players at the time, about the best performers in a season. Does that answer your question?
So you think the All-Star game should be picked with an eye to the past and an eye to the future, right? Trying to like show accurately who's been consistently an All-Star, who when we look back should have been an All-Star level player at this point. That matters to you?
Well, hold on. Are you saying the All-Star game should not be the best players in the sport?
So the way that the All-Star game is constructed, in my mind, is that the voting only looks at the season that's actually happening. And
Sure.
And even if you're like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the heart of his prime, if you played like 5 games, I don't think that you should be in the All-Star game because you haven't performed at the level like as much as everyone else that's putting in All-Star level seasons.
Wait a second. If you played 5 games and you averaged 35 points a game and 20 rebounds, you to me, you've performed at the level that's above everyone else, and the only reason why you would want to dismiss that is because it's a small sample that looks fluky, but you know it's not fluky.
So where's your
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar?
Where's your threshold then?
My personal threshold?
Yeah,
probably 0 games for me if the guy can play.
But so if Kareem, I don't know, I keep saying Kareem. We're going to keep saying Kareem. If Kareem
Kareem, just so everyone understands, in 1978, Kareem missed the beginning of the season. I think he broke his hand punching something or someone. It's not the only time it happened. But so he ends up at the end of the year playing 62 games. Basically has his like normal Kareem stats. The Lakers look way better with him than when he was out of the lineup at the start of the year for the first 19 games. But he probably didn't make the All-Star team, Cody, not just because of the minutes, but because his team's record was terrible without him. And so when they do the voting, they're like, we can't reward you because you're on this terrible team, but without realizing, like, actually, that's why Kareem was so good. The team was terrible without him, and they were way, way better with him. And so if you look at Kareem's basketball reference, there's stars every year for 20 years, except right in the heart of his prime in 1978.
So let's pretend that Kareem played 1 game. He played 1 game, and in that game, he looked like exactly like Kareem the year before.
Yeah,
bumping some hook shots. All of a sudden, he's got this little turnaround jumper. He's blocking shots. He's got the outlet pass going. Scores 35 points, puts in 20 rebounds, has 8 assists. 1 game, that's it. You'd still vote him in to be an All-Star.
Is he healthy? Is he going to play more than that?
I don't know. I can't see the future of what his injury looks like. Ideally, but then you have cases like Chris Middleton where it's like, I don't know, is this guy going to play again? Who knows?
I would vote him in, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
That seems to be the spirit. Well, then what are we doing? Why are we voting in players we know aren't as good as other players?
Well, isn't the point to celebrate people that are performing well that specific season?
So by performing well, you're saying there's a duration to the performance that's required?
Yeah, because then there's nothing to like say. Like I think each season kind of exists in isolation, right? And so if you're not performing that season to the degree that other people are, it feels a little wrong that somebody's not going to be, because it is unfortunately a zero-sum game with the All-Star game. Like if somebody gets voted in, that means somebody else is not getting voted in. That's the endless snubbery conversation that we end up getting to. And if someone makes it in with 1 game, then somebody who's just making the All-Star game for the first time because they made a jump might not make it because it's like, oh, Kareem has to make it because we know he's an MVP level player.
So you like a situation where you look back at a season and the players who weren't the best players made the All-Star team. That's what has never sat well with me. And honestly, as someone who has partaken in way too many historical basketball discussions that's healthy for an adult individual, it creates a lot of problems. And it's almost like a form of misinformation, right? It's like trying to explain how Mo Williams is not better than Chris Paul or something. Like it just gets, I don't understand it. That's what is strange to me. And just to be clear on your questions, because I think they're very good questions, and there's different ways to do this, right? Like, I'm not saying this is the only way to do this, but the spirit of the thing doesn't map to, like, let's look at who's played 200 more minutes in the middle of January when the All-Star game is happening in February. And if you're saying where's the threshold, I do think it's still about the player you see in front of you. I'm not saying anything different. I'm not saying you should legacy vote in players. Like Kareem in 1988, 1989 was probably just like legacy voting, right? But I think if you see a player, if Joel Embiid misses a ton of time and then he starts playing and he's averaging 35 and 15 and 5 assists at 70% true shooting, like it gets let's invert it. Doesn't it get strange to assume he's not going to play more the rest of the season? That gets weird to me. So he's played 20 games, some other guys has played 30 games, and you make this argument that he's played 50% more than the other player. And it's like, yeah, but at the end of the year, they're going to play like 74 and 67. What's the difference?
So, again, I think this is a difference for me between two different awards that are awarded during the season, right? There's the All-NBA awards, and there's the All-Star award. The All-Star award is like, all right, let's take a break. Let's celebrate those of the players that are playing well this season. You know, people that have played past a certain threshold. I'm not going to try and establish a threshold right now, but I think there should be some kind of threshold where you make the All-Star game. And then your argument where it's like, well, aren't we assuming that the person's going to come back? I don't know. I don't want to look to the future about people's injuries, but then with the All-NBA voting at the end of the season, you can actually look at the entire season and be like, all right, so Kareem wasn't an All-Star because he missed X% of the games prior to the All-Star game, but he came back and he looked like Kareem. We could probably vote him to be an All-NBA first team. And I know that's weird to look back and be like, well, how was the All-NBA first team not an All-Star? Then you can look at the context, right? And be like, oh, he missed most of the time during the first part. That's great. That's why we were able to vote somebody else in for the first time to the All-Star game. To me, that seems like the logical conclusion to this. I don't know. It doesn't sound right to me, Ben.
Okay, so you're saying that in addition to the All-Star game giving you more slots and being less selective and restrictive than All-NBA, the All-Star game can also serve as this like almost alternative award, like an additional award. So we don't care about the fact that you weren't one of the 24 best players. We don't care about the fact that when we get to Springfield, it says 7-time All-Star on your plaque instead of 13 or whatever it says. Because if you were good enough, then you could crack the top 15 threshold, which also has a bunch of wackadoodle restrictions on positions and things like that. If you're a center, good luck. There was only 2 of those historically, right? Like we talked about this, some centers that had finished in top 3 in MVP and never even made an All-NBA team. So it seems like that's how you're conceptualizing the All-Star game. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of. And I know that's weird because you have someone like Embiid who's never been first team All-NBA. And I don't think Bob Lanier ever was on an All-NBA team because he was, All-Star, but not All-NBA because there were, Bill Walton, Kareem, and whoever else in front of him. I had another point in there, Ben, but what did you say in there? There was another point that I wanted to comment on in there. The 2 separate awards. Oh, yeah, Ben, this goes back to our MVP conversation from whenever we had it a year ago or so. There are no rules for them, right? So I'm making it up as I'm going. This is how I conceive of it. This is the only way that I conceive of an award being the All-Star game happening in the middle of the season. It's like, all right, all I can do is go off the sample size of the first half of the season to choose the players for this.
Right, but I guess to be clear, because maybe it's not clear, and I don't know if we spent entirely too much podcast time talking about this or not enough, because there are no rules. But to be clear, I'm advocating that you look at the player in front of you and see how he's playing right now and say that is a better basketball player. You're picking a team. You're going, I'm picking the team of the best players. And what you're like, they're all in front of you and they're all playing, and they just played for the last week or 2 weeks or 5 weeks. I mean, we're at this extreme example because we're getting philosophical, but we could just talk about the real players that I hear real podcasters who have huge, giant, real audiences and real votes talking about. And they're saying, well, I don't know, these guys are close, but this other guy's played 200 more minutes. And to me, I'm just like, literally, why does that matter if you've watched them both play and one is at a much higher level than the other one?
So I think the best example from this season, if we should make it really concrete, is Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis is, I think, according to Spotrac,
I thought it was Sport Track.
Sport Rack, Spot Rack, whatever it is, Spotrac. Anthony Davis has missed 21 games this season, and there was a period of time. He started off a little bit slow, but there was a period of time, a stretch where it's like, oh my God, is this actualized MVP level Anthony Davis? Do you think Anthony Davis should be an All-Star this season?
He's gonna play. He's gonna come back and play, right?
I assume.
I think that was the report. He's about to come back. So yes, I would absolutely vote. Wait, I'm gonna spoil that part of the Sub All-Star podcast that's coming up. Anthony Davis will not be a Sub All-Star, and he will not be missing the Sub All-Star team. He will be an obvious level All-Star player.
Okay, and we agree. We agree in the
you agree with that.
Like the actual 200 minutes thing. I'm just calling for some kind of threshold. And like I said, I didn't try and establish it, but it doesn't sit well right with me if in this thought experiment that we came up that somebody plays like 2 games and it's like he looked great in those 2 games. It's like, yeah, but we're ignoring these other people that played great for 40 games, right? That's the part of it that doesn't sit right with me.
That I'm more okay with. I told you my preference on that, my intuition about how the game works. That used to happen. They voted Magic Johnson in after he had to leave the league in 91. I'm pretty comfortable saying Magic Johnson was better than everybody but like a handful of players when he played in that game, despite taking the season off. It's a great event. Those are extreme things, though. If you want to go the other way on that one, the whole point of this thought started with it feels like more than ever, Cody, I hear people say, well, I'm going to start, I don't know. I'm going to start Kevin Huerter on my Western Conference All-Stars because he's played all 52 games. I'm just that's what doesn't seem to fit the spirit of the award and kind of, creates the historical issues that I was talking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and not to spoil too much, but like Jaren Jackson Jr. has played 766 minutes, whereas some other people have played like 1,300 minutes, and you're like, yeah, you've shown me enough, though, that you're not saying that Jaren Jackson is, because maybe he is. He probably is an all-star level player. But I think that's kind of the thing you're actually looking at here. Am I correct in that? Okay.
Exactly, yeah. And as you've said many times, and maybe it's a good place to wrap, like these things that we talk about, they don't have definitions. I've heard some people say if the All-Star game is an exhibition game of sort of celebrating the league and you want to get ratings, maybe we should make sure we have more exciting play. Like LaMelo Ball, please be in the All-Star game and play like 35 minutes a game. We won't tax your body that hard, but you just need to do a service. You just need to do us a solid and have the ball and pass all the time. Like I get that as well, but it does feel like we've gone a little bit too far with I can't have Joel Embiid starting because he only played 1,100 minutes or something. That's sort of my hang up.
Okay. Then we ultimately agree with each other on this. As usual, I feel like it always gets down to like the weeds of it when you start plucking them out, and it's like, oh, maybe in this possible world we disagree. But I think in the actual actionable world, we're on the same page here.
I don't remember what we were going to talk about on today's show, but I think that's it. I think we've wrapped it up. Do you have anything else you want to hit before we get out of here?
What else do you want to do? We wrote a book that somehow connects basketball to all theory. We left out a big chunk of what we were talking. We should save it for next time. Let's tease the championships conversation for next time.
Oh my God, the championship conversations. That's what we researched for this show. We did all this.
Sat for 20 minutes before recording,
did all this research,
all of this data.
Yeah, we'll have to do that next time. Next time, tune in. We're gonna talk about the standings and some crazy championship history that we researched. In the meantime, if you want to support this show and all things Thinking Basketball, check out patreon.com/thinkingbasketball. That's where we easily look up every day what the rolling offensive efficiency is around the league and for every team in the last month, because we have a ton of stats for players and teams that we use that update daily. We help them use They help us research podcasts. They help us research videos. I can't put together a sentence, so that's it. Patreon.com/thinkingbasketball if you want to support us. As always, thanks for listening all the way until the end. And wherever you are, of course, I hope you're having a great day.